Hey everyone, welcome back. I know it's been a while, but as we all know, life gets busy. So it's the start of winter, and the ground is starting to get very wet here. The dahlias are all dying down, so it's time to get them up. I don't really want them sitting in the wet dirt any longer than they have to, so time to dig them up and store them. Still not decided on whether I'll divide them as yet or store them just as their clumps and then wait until spring till they start to show their eyes, so I can divide them a little more with a little more confidence. This is only my second year of dividing, so possibly wait until spring till the eyes shoot. Last year I did a great workshop on dividing dahlias, which was really helpful, but having said that, I also had dug up and divided most of mine before I actually ended up doing the workshop. But most of the ones that I divided prior to doing that, I had actually a really good strike rate, so to speak, in having divided them the right way. Most of them seem to actually eye up very well and grow on very well. There are a few that didn't store so well, but that's not necessarily to do with the dividing. That was more to do with possibly it being my first year of storing them, but also possibly some varieties are known to be a little bit temperamental when it comes to storing. So overall I was really happy with how it went, but back to this year, time to lift them, get them out of the ground before they get too wet. So I thought I'd bring you along and you can see how I go about it. There's lots of ways of doing it. Everyone has their own ideas on how it should be done. I'm not necessarily the most gentle when it comes to digging them up, but as I said, I had no major issues last year, so basically doing pretty much the same thing again this year. Anyway, basically every plant is labelled. I actually just use an old aluminium Venetian blind as my plant labels. It's a trick that an uncle of mine showed me many years ago. He used to do that with all his orchids. I do it with all my orchids too. Having said that, the aluminium Venetian blinds are getting harder to come across. However, you can still use some of the newer plastic ones, but they need to be the slightly thicker ones, not the really flimsy ones. So when I planted all my tubers, I labelled every one as it went in. So in front of every clump there is a label. So basically what I do, I've gone down and I chop down the remaining plant. I then come through, dig up each clump, and then I use, let me get it out of my pocket, flagging tape. Cheap as chips from Bunnings. I think it's 500 metres on a roll, something like that, and it's only about $6. Anyway, so dig up the clump, write a label on the flagging tape with a Sharpie. It doesn't necessarily need to be a garden marker because they're getting stored out of the weather, so it's not as if the Sharpie is going to deteriorate, when they're stored. And then what I do is I take them and I put them in a protected spot, sit them in crates, sit them in a protected spot for a day or two, let the dirt that's still on them dry out a little bit so that there's no extra moisture, and then pack them. I'm actually going to pack them in a mixture of sawdust and a little bit of dry potting mix into boxes, and then that's where they'll stay until spring, until they start to show their eyes. There's lots of different methods different mediums that people like to store them in. Some people like to store them dry, not particularly good for my climate. Some people like to use vermiculite, some people like to use sawdust, some people like to use a dry potting mix, some people like to do a combination. It's completely up to you and what you feel works for you and your climate wherever you are. It can be a little bit of trial and error. Some people like to do a mixture of different ones as a trial, you know, in the first couple of years to work out what works best for them. As I say, last year I stored in sawdust and potting mix, had actually the majority of them were actually in just straight sawdust, and as I say, I really didn't have many issues. So essentially that's what I'm going to do again this year. Anyway, let's get on with it and you can see how I go about it. Okay, so as you can see, it's not a particularly complicated process. You would have noticed me taking off some of the excess dirt as the clumps come up. That's to help the tubers actually dry out. Some of the tubers, because it has been a bit wet here, some of the tubers have these little kind of bumpy parts on them when they come up. That's actually, they're called lenticels. So that's actually how the tuber attempts to deal with excess moisture, and that's part of the reason I want to get them up, is so that they're not sitting in wet dirt. The lenticels don't affect how they store or the quality of the tuber, they just don't look that pretty. You know, and in the world we live in, everyone likes everything to look pretty and gorgeous, but as gardeners we all know that's quite often not the case. Anyway, so that's essentially the process. Dig them up, label them as you dig them up so you know what's what. If knowing what colours or what varieties or cultivars each particular clump is important to you, make sure you label them. Some people like to label them actually on each tuber. I'm more concerned about doing that once I'm actually dividing them rather than doing it now as I'm digging them up. So yeah, not a complicated process. As I said, I take off the excess dirt now. Any other excess dirt will actually dry and kind of shrink as the tubers are stored. So come springtime, if you're dividing in spring, that excess dirt will basically just fall kind of fall off as you go to divide them, or you can use a soft brush to brush it off. If some people hose them off now and store them with, you know, completely clean, that's fine too. It all depends on what you want to do. At the minute, the ground's wet enough. I don't need to be adding any extra moisture by standing there hosing off 500 odd tuber clumps. I've dug, so I think I've dug about 180 clumps up, another 320 odd to go. So a little bit of work still ahead of me, but as you can see, it's not taking that long. I'm probably averaging about 30 clumps per hour to dig up, and that's digging and labelling as I go. So, you know, I guess it depends on how energetic I feel and how many days I stick at it in a row. But meant to be some nice weather in the next few days, so hopefully I can get the majority of them up. I'll turn the camera around in a sec and show you the patch, or the beds that I've already dug up. Those ones that I've dug up first, not only did I want to get the tubers up, I need the space for the ranuncs and the anemones that I've got to plant for spring flowering. I've got a whole lot of ranuncs already pre-sprouting in trays. They've been soaked and then planted in trays so they can actually shoot. And then while they're getting big enough to actually come out into the ground, that gives me a chance to get these tubers out. I'm not going to have all of these beds full of ranuncs. That might be a little bit more to bite off than I can chew in the first year of growing them, but I certainly need a few of the beds to have the tubers out, get some more compost and stuff through them, and then I can plant the ranuncs out and they can sit happily over winter and grow away and be ready to flower in spring. Anyway, I'll turn the camera around, give you a bit of a look at the beds that I've already done. The weeds here have gone mental in the last few weeks. During peak flowering season, there was like not a skerrick of grass or weed down here, and in the last 4 weeks since the plants have started to die down, and with the rain that we've had, the weeds have gone mental, so excuse the weeds. But hey, all gardeners have weeds, we just don't like to admit it. Anyway, so these are the beds that have still got dahlias in them, pretty much around the perimeter. This is the bed I was just digging. While we're here, I'll show you some of the clumps that have just been dug up. So you can see the flag and tape just tied around the stem, nothing fancy. Obviously some clumps are bigger than others. This one here, quite a nice size. But then, others have only quite small clumps. But hey, that's okay. No dramas. So here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beds dug. Or almost. These couple here and these couple here, I just wanted to let die down a little bit more before I lifted them, but weed central. So I still got these beds down the side here, and then all of those beds across there to dig up, and then the couple of tyres that were planted out, and then those beds there. So look, still some work to go, but it's all part of the job, isn't it? Anyway, hope you've enjoyed, folks, and catch you next time.